The freezing Chicago pavement bit into my skin as my sister shoved me out of the frame. Desperate for the perfect paparazzi shot, my parents did not offer a hand. They just laughed at their useless black sheep struggling with 4 Louis Vuitton trunks. Little do they know, the woman they left shivering in the snow is the secret owner of the Sterling Monarch. Tonight, their $50,000 engagement party will end not with a toast, but in handcuffs. My name is Audrey, and at 30 years old, I was apparently less of a daughter and more of a pack mule. The wind whipping off Lake Michigan cut through my threadbare wool coat like a knife, but I barely felt it over the burning ache in my shoulders. I was dragging 4 massive Louis Vuitton trunks toward the revolving doors of the Sterling Monarch, my boots slipping on the icy pavement. Ahead of me, my family strode effortlessly toward the warmth of the lobby, their laughter ringing out like crystal bells in the frigid Chicago air. They looked like royalty in their bespoke furs and Italian suits, while I trailed behind like a shadow they could not quite shake off. The entrance to the Sterling Monarch was blindingly bright, a beacon of gold and glass that screamed old money. This was where my younger sister, Tiffany, had demanded her engagement party be held. It was the most expensive venue in the city, and naturally, she deserved nothing less. As we approached the red carpet, a swarm of paparazzi emerged from the sidelines, their cameras hungry for a shot of the bride-to-be. Tiffany lit up instantly, posing with a practiced tilt of her chin. Then she noticed me. I was directly behind her, struggling with the luggage, ruining the composition of her perfect moment. Without missing a beat or breaking her smile, she turned and slammed her hands into my chest. "Move," she hissed through gritted teeth. The force of the shove caught me off guard. My boots lost their traction on a patch of black ice, and I went down hard. My knees slammed into the concrete, and the freezing, dirty slush instantly soaked through my jeans. I gasped, the air knocked out of me, and looked up instinctively for a hand. There were no hands reaching for me. There was only laughter. My father, Robert, chuckled as he adjusted his silk scarf, looking at me with distinct amusement. My mother, Cynthia, did not even bend down. Instead, she stepped closer and delivered a sharp, warning kick to the side of my boot with the toe of her designer heel. "Audrey, get up," she whispered harshly, her voice dripping with disdain. "You are making a scene. Do you have to be so clumsy and embarrassing every single second of your life? Drag those bags out of the frame. You are ruining the aesthetic." I remained on the ground for a second longer than necessary. The physical pain in my knees was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the hollow, aching cold in my chest. This was the summary of my life for the past 20 years. I was the mistake, the errand girl, the punching bag they kept around to make themselves feel superior. I looked at their faces distorted by the flashing lights and realized that I had spent 2 decades trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Tiffany loomed over me, blocking out the harsh lights. She smoothed her dress, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Go to the service entrance around the back," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger toward a dark, trash-filled alleyway. "Take my bags up to the presidential suite, and stay there. I do not want to see your ugly face at my party. Do you hear me? If you come down to the main hall, I will have security throw you out into the street." They turned their backs on me, sweeping into the golden glow of the lobby without a backward glance. I stayed kneeling in the snow for another moment. Then, slowly, I stood up. I brushed the dirty slush from my knees. The stinging cold was still there, but something inside me had shifted. The resignation that usually clouded my eyes evaporated, replaced by a clarity as sharp as the winter wind. I gripped the handle of the nearest trunk, but instead of heading toward the service alley, I marched straight toward the main revolving doors. I reached into the inner pocket of my cheap coat and pulled out a card. It was made of heavy anodized titanium, Matte black, with absolutely no logo or numbers on the front, only a small, embedded chip. A burly man in a dark suit, the head of security for the hotel, stepped forward immediately to intercept me. He saw my wet clothes and the mountain of luggage. "Miss, you cannot come in here." He started, his voice authoritative. "The service entrance is—" I held up the black card. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto the piece of metal in my hand. He blinked, looking from the card to my face, and I saw the color drain from his cheeks. He knew exactly what that card was. It was the founder's key, a myth among the staff, possessing override authority for the entire global chain of Etheria holdings. He opened his mouth to stammer an apology, perhaps to call me by my title, but I locked eyes with him and raised a single finger to my lips. "Shh," I breathed, my voice low and dangerous. I lowered the hand holding the card and signaled for him to take the bags. The game was on, and tonight, I was playing on home turf. The heavy steel doors of the private elevator slid shut, sealing out the noise of the lobby and the stinging humiliation of the last 10 minutes. As the car began its silent ascent to the 50th floor, a transformation took over my body. My shoulders, previously hunched in a defensive posture to ward off my mother's physical and verbal blows, straightened with a snap. I exhaled a long breath, shedding the skin of Audrey the scapegoat and stepping fully into the skin of Audrey Vance, the CEO. To the outside world, the owner of Etheria Holdings was a ghost, a nameless entity represented only by lawyers and shell companies. I preferred it that way. It allowed me to walk through my own hotels unnoticed, checking for dust on the baseboards and inspecting the quality of the linen. My family did not know this because they simply never cared to ask where I went after I ran away from home at 20. They assumed I was destitute. I leaned my head back against the cool, mirrored wall of the elevator. My mother had wanted me to be a trophy wife. She had mapped out my life when I was 16, circling charity galas where I could meet wealthy, older men. When I told her I wanted to study business, she laughed until she choked. I left with nothing. I started as a housekeeper, scrubbing toilets in a motel, while Tiffany was given unlimited access to my father's credit cards to build her brand as an influencer. While she was learning how to edit her waistline in photos, I was learning yield management, real estate law, and corporate acquisition. 10 years later, I owned the very ground they were currently standing on. The elevator chimed softly, opening directly into the penthouse office, the nerve center of the hotel. The room was a fortress of silence and technology, lined with wall-to-wall monitors displaying every public angle of the sterling monarch. As I stepped out, 3 senior managers immediately stopped their conversation and bowed their heads in unison. They did not see the wet stains on my jeans or my messy hair. They only saw the authority I wielded. Marcus, the general manager of the Chicago branch, stepped forward. He looked anxious. "Ms. Vance." "We were not expecting you to come up through the private lift," Marcus said, his voice tight. "We have a situation at the front desk, the party for the Diamond Ballroom. The guests are being incredibly abusive to the concierge. They are demanding a free upgrade to the Imperial Suite because the bride claims to be famous." "I know," I said calmly, walking past him to the main desk. "Pull up their reservation file." I sat down in my leather chair and watched the security feed on the central screen, down in the lobby. My mother was pointing a finger in the face of a young receptionist, her mouth moving in a familiar, hateful rhythm. "Here is the file. Ms. Vance," Marcus said, tapping a tablet. "They booked the diamond package. It includes the ballroom rental, 5-course catering, and premium open bar. Total cost is $50,000. Paid in full this morning." I stared at the number on the screen. $50,000. Something was wrong. My father was a senior accountant at a logistics firm. True, but he was terrible with his own money. I knew for a fact he had refinanced their house twice to pay for Tiffany's failed business ventures. He was constantly complaining about interest rates and the cost of utilities. There was no way Robert Vance had $50,000 of disposable income to drop on a party. "Show me the payment method," I commanded. Marcus swiped the screen. It was a credit card transaction. "Processed at 9 this morning." I leaned in closer, squinting at the billing details. The card type was a corporate expense card issued by Miller and Associates, the firm where my father worked. It was not a personal card. "He is paying for a wedding party with company funds," I murmured to myself, a cold smile touching my lips. "He thinks he can shuffle the numbers before the monthly audit hits." Marcus looked at me, waiting for orders. "Shall we decline the card and cancel the event?" "Ms. Vance, if there is fraud involved." I watched my father on the screen. He was laughing now, patting the arm of a waiter, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. He had no idea that the daughter he just left in the snow was holding his financial warrant in her hands. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Do not cancel anything yet. I want you to contact our friends in the fraud department at the bank, quietly. Run a full trace on that card. I want to know exactly whose money he is spending." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. "Let them enjoy the appetizers," I said, turning back to Marcus. "We are not going to kick them out. We are going to let them commit to the crime. When the time comes, I want the fall to be absolute. Down in the Diamond Ballroom." The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the even thicker stench of desperation. I had slipped into a charcoal silk tuxedo from the owner's wardrobe in the penthouse, pairing it with a silver Venetian mask to blend in with the masquerade theme of the evening. From behind the safety of my disguise, I watched my family perform their greatest act, yet the wealthy Vances. My father, holding a glass of champagne he definitely could not afford, was loudly recounting a completely fabricated story to a group of bored-looking businessmen. Oh, yes, the owner and I go way back. Robert lied, his chest puffed out. He insisted we take the ballroom for Tiffany. I told him it was too much, but he simply would not take no for an answer. I stifled a dry laugh behind my mask. The only thing the owner had ever given him was a foreclosure notice on a rental property 10 years ago, which I had secretly bought to keep them from being homeless, near the chocolate fountain. Tiffany was holding her phone up, finding her best angle for a live stream. She pouted her lips, batting her false eyelashes at the camera. "Thank you so much to the Sterling Monarch for sponsoring my special night," she squealed, her voice pitching up an octave. Being an influencer really has its perks. You guys, make sure to like and subscribe for more luxury content. It was pathetic. My financial team had just confirmed that she had maxed out 5 credit cards and taken a predatory loan just to buy the dress she was wearing. She was not a star. She was a sinking ship wrapped in tulle. I moved through the crowd, a silent observer in my own kingdom. I passed my mother, Cynthia, who had cornered a young waiter near the kitchen doors. The poor boy had spilled a single drop of water on the tablecloth. "You incompetent little idiot," Cynthia hissed, her face twisted in an ugly snarl that she hid from the cameras. "Do you know who I am? I could have you fired with a snap of my fingers. Get out of my sight before I make sure you never work in this city again." I made a mental note to give that waiter a raise and a personal apology later. My eyes scanned the room and landed on my father again. He had stepped away from his audience and was huddled in a shadowy corner, his phone pressed to his ear. The arrogance was gone, replaced by sweaty panic. I drifted closer, pretending to admire a flower arrangement. I know the audit is next week," Robert whispered frantically into the phone. "I just need a few days." "Look, once the wedding happens, my son-in-law will cover the gap. I just need to rotate the capital. No, do not call the bank." He hung up, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. This was my chance. I adjusted my mask and approached him, adopting the confident swagger of a shark smelling blood. "Rough night on the market?" I asked, deepening my voice slightly. I could not help but overhear. "I am an angel investor looking for aggressive portfolios." Robert looked up, his eyes lighting up with greed. He saw the expensive cut of my suit and assumed I was his savior. Ah, yes, just some minor liquidity issues, he stammered, trying to regain his composure. I am actually managing a very complex fund at Miller and Associates. I have a strategy. A bit high risk, but I borrow against the company accounts to maximize short-term yield. It is brilliant. Really? Is that so? I asked, leaning in. So you are using client funds for personal leverage. It is not personal, he insisted, eager to impress me. It is creative accounting. I moved $200,000 this morning. By the time they check the books on Monday, I will have put it back with interest. My daughter is marrying into the Rockefeller family. Practically, I smiled behind my mask. My diamond brooch was recording every word of his confession. Fascinating strategy, I said. Before I could extract more, a shrill voice cut through the air. You? I turned to see Tiffany storming toward me. She was not looking at my face. She was looking at my feet. In my haste to change, I had forgotten to swap out my worn-out, salt-stained leather boots. They were the same boots she had kicked snow onto less than an hour ago. I know those ugly shoes, Tiffany shrieked, her face flushing red with rage. Audrey, you actually dared to sneak in here. She did not wait for an answer. With a dramatic gasp intended for her audience, she lunged forward and deliberately slammed her shoulder into mine. She jerked her hand, sending the contents of her red wine glass splashing all over my silk tuxedo. "Oh my God," Tiffany screamed, playing the victim instantly. Security. This crazy woman just attacked me. Look what she did to my dress. The music stopped. The room fell silent. I stood there, red wine dripping down the front of my suit, and looked at my sister. She thought she had just won. She had no idea she had just poured wine on the executioner. The silver mask was ripped from my face with such violence that the elastic band snapped against my ear, leaving a stinging welt. I did not flinch, even as the cool air of the ballroom hit my exposed skin. Tiffany held the mask up like a trophy, her face twisted into a mask of triumphant malice. She spun around to face her guests, her voice screeching over the murmurs of the crowd. "Look, everyone," she shouted, gesturing wildly at me. "It is my psycho sister. She is so jealous that she sneaked in here to ruin my big night. Can you believe this? She is mentally unstable, totally obsessed with me." The room erupted. Instead of shock or sympathy, a wave of laughter rippled through the gathered socialites. Phones were raised instantly. A sea of black rectangles recording my humiliation. I saw flashes go off, blinding and relentless. They were not seeing a human being. They were seeing content. They were seeing a viral moment. Before I could speak, a blur of blue silk rushed toward me. My mother, Cynthia, closed the distance with surprising speed. She did not hesitate. She swung her arm back and delivered a slap so hard it echoed through the silent pauses in the music. My head snapped to the side. The taste of copper filled my mouth. "You disgrace," Cynthia screamed, her chest heaving. "How dare you? You are a stain on this family. Is it not enough that you are a failure? Must you drag us down into the gutter with you? Get out. Someone get her out of here." I slowly turned my head back to face her. My cheek burned as if it had been branded, but strangely, the physical pain felt distant. It was miles away. What I felt most was a cold, clinical detachment. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, heavy pity for a creature so consumed by hatred. I looked past her shoulder to my father. Robert was standing by the champagne tower, looking terrified. Not for me, but for his reputation. I locked eyes with him, giving him one silent opportunity, 1 second to be a father, 1 second to say, Stop. That is enough. Robert looked at me, then looked at the wealthy investors he was trying to impress. He turned his back on me. Security, Robert yelled, waving his hand dismissively. Please remove this woman. We do not know her. She is just some stalker. The heavy thud of footsteps approached. The head of security, the same man who had stopped me at the door earlier, marched into the circle. My mother smirked, stepping back to allow the man to do his job. Throw her in the alley where she belongs. Cynthia spat. The large man stepped forward, but he did not grab me. Instead, he moved with the precision of a bodyguard and positioned himself directly between me and my mother. He crossed his massive arms, creating a human wall, and glared down at Cynthia. The smirk fell off my mother's face. The room went deadly quiet. "Excuse me," Cynthia shrieked, her voice cracking. "Are you deaf?" I said, "Throw her out. She is trespassing." The guard did not even look at her. He turned his head slightly toward me, lowering his voice to a respectful rumble. "Ma'am, are you injured? Do you want me to call the police on this woman for assault?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tiffany dropped my mask, her mouth hanging open. Robert spun around, his eyes wide. They could not process what they were seeing. The hired help was protecting the intruder against the paying guests. I took a deep breath and gently touched the guard's arm. "Stand down. Mr. Henderson," I said softly. "I will handle this." He nodded immediately and took a step back, though he kept a wary eye on my mother. I wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth with my thumb. I walked forward until I was toe-to-toe with Tiffany. She looked confused, her confidence wavering for the first time. "Tiffany," I said, my voice low but carrying clearly in the silence. "I am going to give you a choice. You can apologize right now, admit you are a liar, and maybe, just maybe, we can walk away from this without destroying your life. Are you sure you want to keep playing this game?" Tiffany stared at me. For a second, I saw fear. But then, she looked at the cameras. She looked at her friends. Her vanity won. She sneered, summoning all the ugliness she had cultivated over 25 years. "You are pathetic," she hissed. Then, she gathered saliva in her mouth and spat on the floor, inches from my boots. "Get out! You leech," she screamed. "Go back to scrubbing toilets?" I looked down at the spit on the polished marble floor. That was it. The final tether snapping. The last drop of mercy evaporating. I looked up at her and smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Okay," I said. I tried. I turned my back on the jeering crowd and the spittle on the floor, walking away with a rhythmic, measured cadence. I did not run. I did not cry. I simply marched to the private elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of my sister's screeching laughter. By the time the lift reached the top floor, the heartbroken sister was gone. In her place stood the CEO, and I was ready to conduct a forensic dissection of the Vance family legacy. I strode into the command center where my head of financial intelligence, a sharp woman named Sarah, was waiting. The screens around her were blazing with data streams. "Tell me everything," I commanded, leaning over the glass desk. "Do not spare me the details." Sarah looked up, her face grave. "It is worse than we thought." "Ms. Vance," she said, handing me a tablet. "We traced the funding for the party. Your father did not just use a corporate expense card. He has been systematically embezzling from his firm's employee pension fund. He has siphoned off nearly $200,000 over the last 6 months to pay for Tiffany's lifestyle." I stared at the numbers. $200,000. He had stolen the retirement savings of innocent workers to buy champagne for a daughter who despised him. "And my mother?" I asked, my voice devoid of warmth. "Complicit," Sarah replied, swiping to a new document. She set up a fake charity called the Cynthia Vance Foundation for underprivileged youth. There are 0 donations going out. It is a shell entity used to launder the stolen pension money to make it look like legitimate income for tax purposes. I nodded slowly. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. But Sarah was not finished. She hesitated, tapping a final file on the screen. Then there is Tiffany, Sarah said, her voice dropping. Her social media empire is a house of cards. She bought 100% of her followers from a click farm in Eastern Europe. She is currently being sued by 3 different skincare companies for promoting fraudulent products. But, Audrey, you need to see this. She pushed the tablet toward me. I looked at the screen and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a loan application for $50,000 from a predatory, high-interest lender. The applicant's name was Audrey Vance. The social security number was mine. The address listed was my parents' house. She stole my identity, I whispered, the realization settling in like concrete. She used your old expired ID. Sarah confirmed. She has opened 4 different credit lines in your name and maxed them all out. She is destroying your credit score to fund her wedding. I closed my eyes for a brief second. This was no longer a family dispute. This was organized crime. They had not just abused me emotionally. They had committed felonies against me and countless others. I reached for the secure phone on my desk and dialed a number I had not used in 2 years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Director Thorne, the voice said. Hello, James? I said. It is Audrey Vance. I am calling in that favor you owe me from the money laundering case at the plaza last year. There was a pause, and then the tone on the other end shifted to alertness. I am listening. Audrey, I have a RICO case for you, I said, staring at the surveillance feed of my parents dancing downstairs. Wire fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The perpetrators are currently located in the Diamond Ballroom of the Sterling Monarch. I have audio confessions, bank transfer records, and IP traces. I am sending the package to your secure server right now. I will have agents there in 15 minutes. Thorne promised. I hung up and turned to Sarah. Print the invoices. I ordered. Print everything. The stolen pension funds, the fake charity ledgers, the identity theft logs, and the real bill for this party. I want a physical paper trail that stretches from here to the county jail. Sarah nodded and hit the print command. The sound of the printer whirring to life was the sweetest music I had heard all night. I walked to the mirror and adjusted my suit. I wiped the last smudge of red wine from my lapel. I was done hiding in the shadows. It was time for the chairman to make her entrance. The atmosphere in the Diamond Ballroom shifted from celebratory to suffocating in the span of a single heartbeat. My father, high on the adrenaline of his own lies, waved a waiter over for another round of vintage champagne. He tapped his corporate card on the wireless terminal with a flourish, expecting the satisfying beep of approval. Instead, the machine emitted a harsh, dissonant buzz. Robert frowned, tapping it again. Harder this time. It is the machine, he grumbled loudly, his smile wavering. Get a new one. The restaurant manager, a tall woman named Elena, whom I had personally instructed just minutes prior, stepped into the circle of light. She did not lower her voice. In fact, she projected it so that it carried over the low hum of jazz. The machine is working perfectly. Sir, Elena announced, her tone icy and professional. Your card has been declined. The bank has flagged the account for immediate suspension due to suspected fraudulent activity. The words hung in the air like smoke. The chatter at the nearby tables died instantly. Guests leaned in, their eyes darting between my father's pale face and the unyielding manager. That is ridiculous, Tiffany shrieked, stomping over in her massive gown. She grabbed the card from her father's trembling hand and shoved it back at Elena. Run it again. Do you have any idea how many followers I have? I will ruin this hotel on Yelp. Run it again. I cannot run a frozen asset. Ma'am, Elena replied calmly. Tiffany's fiancé, a young hedge fund manager named Bradley who cared more about his portfolio than his bride, stepped forward. His brow was furrowed, his eyes scanning the terrified expression on Robert's face. Robert Bradley asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Why is your company card being flagged for fraud? You told me you owned the firm. You said the wedding was a write-off." It is a clerical error," Bradley Robert stammered, sweat beating rapidly on his upper lip. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling as he tried to dial the bank. "I will get them on the line. Just a mix-up." Damn computers. Hello, hello. He stared at the screen. No signal. I had jammed the cell reception in the ballroom. Before Bradley could demand an answer, the ambient mood lighting vanished. In an instant, the harsh, white cleaning lights of the ballroom flooded the space. It was the kind of light that exposed every flaw, every stain, and every lie. The music cut out abruptly, leaving only the sound of Robert's heavy breathing and the nervous rustling of silk dresses. The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been cycling through photos of Tiffany, flickered and went black. A second later, the golden crest of Etheria Holdings appeared, followed by words in bold, red capital letters, "Eviction Notice." A gasp went through the crowd. Then, my voice boomed through the overhead speakers, magnified and distorted slightly by the acoustics of the hall. "Attention, Vance family." Tiffany jumped, her eyes darting around the room. She let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, turning to her guests with a frantic smile. "Oh my God, you guys!" she cried, clapping her hands. "It is a surprise. It is part of the show. It is performance art. Keep filming." She looked desperate, like an actress trying to save a play that was burning down around her. "It is not a show. Tiffany," my voice continued from above, calm and final. The double doors at the main entrance swung open with a heavy thud that vibrated through the floorboards. I stepped through the threshold. The wine-stained tuxedo and the mask were gone. I was wearing a pristine white tailored suit that cost more than my father made in a year. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. I did not walk alone. Flanking me in a V formation were 10 senior security officers and 4 uniformed police officers. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble, the sound echoing in the deathly silent room. I was no longer the sister they pushed in the snow. I was the avalanche. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was absolute. It was heavy and physical, pressing down on the shoulders of every guest in the room. As I walked down the center aisle, the air felt electric. I did not look left or right, yet I could sense the shift in the room's energy. The hotel staff waiters who had been pouring wine, bussers clearing plates, and the managers standing by the walls all stopped what they were doing. As I passed them, they bowed their heads. It was not a gesture of fear, but of profound respect. I was their leader, the woman who signed their paychecks and knew their names, and seeing them acknowledge me was the first blow to my family's delusion. My mother, unable to read the room, broke the silence with a shriek. She lunged toward me, her face a mask of purple rage, her hands curled into claws. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" she screamed, spitting the words out. "You ungrateful little..." She never finished the sentence. Before she could get within 5 feet of me, 2 of my security officers stepped into her path. They did not touch her violently. They simply became an immovable wall. Cynthia slammed into them and stumbled back, her high heels wobbling on the marble floor. She looked up, stunned that the hired help had dared to block her. I did not stop walking. I ascended the stairs to the stage, the click of my heels echoing like gunshots. I took the microphone from the stand, blew gently into it to check the sound, and looked out at the sea of faces. "Welcome to the Sterling Monarch," I said, my voice amplified and crystal clear. "I hope you have enjoyed the evening so far. I am afraid, however, that the party is officially over." My sister, Tiffany, stood near the cake, her face pale. She let out a hysterical, disbelief-laden laugh. "Your hotel," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You are insane. You are a maid, Dad. Tell them she is crazy. She is having a psychotic break." I did not answer her. Instead, I nodded to Marcus, my general manager. He stepped up to the microphone stand next to me, adjusting his tie with solemn dignity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice booming, "it is my distinct honor to introduce you to the chairwoman, CEO, and sole owner of Etheria Holdings and the Sterling Monarch Hotel Group, Ms. Audrey Vance." The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. The wealthy guests, the social climbers, and the business partners my father was trying to impress. They all knew the name Etheria. It was a titan in the industry, a mysterious entity that swallowed real estate and turned it into gold. To realize that the owner was standing right there, and that she was the daughter being abused by the hosts, caused a ripple of shock. I saw the faces of the guests change. The admiration they had feigned for my parents vanished, replaced instantly by cold, hard disdain. They stepped away from the Vances as if my family were contagious. Bradley, Tiffany's fiancé, was the first to react physically. He looked at me, radiating power on the stage, and then he looked at Tiffany, who was trembling in her cheap, unpaid-for dress. He dropped her hand. He took a large step back, putting distance between himself and the sinking ship. Bradley Tiffany whispered, tears welling up, "Do not listen to them." He ignored her, buttoning his jacket and looking at the floor. I turned to my attention to the front row, where my parents stood frozen. "You came into my house," I said, my voice low and dangerous, reverberating through the hall. "You used stolen money to throw a party in my ballroom. And then you dared to assault the owner of this establishment at her own front door because she did not fit your aesthetic." I raised a remote control and clicked it. The eviction notice on the massive screen behind me disappeared. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared, magnified for everyone to see. It showed dates, routing numbers, and massive withdrawals labeled unauthorized. "See for yourselves," I commanded. "Robert Vance, embezzlement of pension funds, $200,000 stolen from hard-working employees to pay for crystal glasses and flowers." My father looked up at the screen. He saw his own digital signature blown up 20 feet high. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving only a hollow shell. His knees buckled, and he collapsed into a nearby chair, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, realizing that his life was effectively over. I gave a subtle nod to the back of the room. It was the only signal necessary. The heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom burst open, but this time it was not for a grand entrance of a bride. It was a raid. A dozen agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI and Economic Crime Unit stormed into the hall, moving with a terrifying synchronized efficiency that cut through the silence like a blade. They did not look at the guests. They marched straight toward the front row where my family stood frozen in a tableau of horror. An agent with a grim face stepped up to my father, who was still slumped in his chair. He pulled Robert up by his arm with zero gentleness. "Robert Vance," the agent barked, his voice projecting clearly. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement of corporate funds, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent." My father's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked around wildly, his eyes bulging. "Wait, there must be a mistake," he stammered, his voice trembling violently. I can explain. It was just a temporary loan. I was going to put it back. Please, do not do this." The agent ignored him, spinning him around and snapping the cold steel cuffs onto his wrists. The metallic click echoed through the room, louder than any toast that had been made that night. My mother, Cynthia, tried to back away. her heels clicking frantically on the marble as she sought an escape route. She bumped right into a female officer. "Cynthia Vance," the officer stated, grabbing my mother's wrist. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering through a charitable organization." "Get your hands off me!" Cynthia shrieked, struggling as the handcuffs were locked into place. "Do you know who I am? I am a respectable member of this community. This is assault. Look at these people. They will tell you who I am." She looked toward the crowd for support, but the guests were not rushing to help. They were rushing to get the best angle. Hundreds of smartphones were raised in the air, recording every second of their humiliation. The live stream that Tiffany had started was now broadcasting the destruction of the Vance family to the entire world. Tiffany let out a wail of pure terror. She scrambled toward Bradley, her fiancé, grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo with desperate hands. "Bradley!" she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks. "Do something, call your lawyers. They are arresting Mom and Dad. You have to fix this." "Baby, please." Bradley looked down at her hands on his expensive suit as if they were covered in filth. He peeled her fingers off his jacket one by one and shoved her away. "Do not touch me," Bradley said, his voice dripping with disgust. "The wedding is off, Tiffany. I cannot have my firm associated with a family of criminals. Do not call me, ever." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without looking back. Tiffany collapsed to her knees, sobbing hysterically. Ms. Tiffany Vance, a third officer, approached her, holding a warrant. "Stand up. You are being detained for investigation regarding identity theft, credit card fraud, and falsifying documents." "No. No." Tiffany gasped, hyperventilating. "I did not." "It was not me. We have the IP logs and the surveillance footage from the bank provided by the victim, Ms. Audrey Vance," the officer said, pulling Tiffany to her feet and handcuffing her. I stood on the stage, watching the scene unfold from my vantage point. I searched inside myself for a feeling of joy or gloating, but I found none. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of a ledger finally being balanced. It was the feeling of checking off a completed task. Below me, my mother looked up. Her hair was disheveled, her face streaked with tears and sweat. She saw me standing there, untouched and powerful, and her expression shifted from anger to a pathetic, desperate pleading. "Audrey," she screamed over the noise of the crowd. "Audrey, tell them to stop. I am your mother. How can you let them do this to us? We are your family. Help me. Please, baby, help Mommy." The room went quiet again, waiting for my reaction. I lifted the microphone to my lips one last time. I looked down at the woman who had kicked me while I was on the ground less than an hour ago. "You do not have a daughter," I said, my voice steady and devoid of warmth. "You only have a servant you beat, mocked, and used for 20 years. Well, consider this your notice. The servant has just fired you from her life." I lowered the microphone. The police pushed them forward. My father, weeping openly, my mother, screaming incoherently, and my sister, dragging her feet in a ruined dress. They were led out of the Diamond Ballroom, marching past the rows of guests who watched them with a mixture of shock and morbid entertainment. They walked out of the light and into the custody of the law, leaving me standing alone on the stage, finally, completely free. The arrest was only the beginning of their punishment. As the officers began to shepherd my family toward the exit, I raised my hand to halt the procession. I was not finished. The criminal justice system would handle their freedom, but I was going to handle their assets. "Wait," I commanded, my voice stopping the convoy in its tracks. "They have outstanding debts to this establishment. I am exercising the hotel's right to seize collateral." I pointed to the 4 massive Louis Vuitton trunks that were still stacked on the brass luggage cart near the entrance. The very same trunks I had broken my back carrying just an hour ago. Confiscate those bags. I ordered Marcus. They contain personal items that will be auctioned to cover a fraction of the $50,000 bill they racked up tonight. Log every item as evidence of theft recovery. My mother gasped, trying to lunge for her luggage. You cannot take my things. My furs are in there. Your furs, I asked, arching an eyebrow. You mean the furs bought with the pension fund? Those belong to the state now. Then came the final indignity for my sister. A woman from the bridal boutique in the hotel lobby, a strategic partner of Etheria, stepped forward with two assistants. They had been alerted by my team that the credit card used for the dress was fraudulent. Ms. Vance, the boutique manager said, stepping in front of Tiffany. That gown is property of the store. Since payment has been declined and you are being taken into custody for fraud, we are reclaiming it immediately to prevent damage in a holding cell. Tiffany shrieked as they ushered her behind a privacy screen set up by the police. Minutes later, the dress was carried away in a garment bag. Tiffany emerged, shivering and humiliated, wrapped in nothing but a white linen tablecloth that someone had grabbed from a buffet table. She looked like a ghost of the bride she thought she was, clutching the fabric to her chest, her fake tan looking orange and patchy under the harsh lights. I turned to my head of finance. Execute the freeze, I said. Shut down every single account linked to the identity they stole from me. Cancel the cards, lock the bank transfers, and flag their names in the International Credit Bureau. Leave them with zero access to liquidity. The guests, the so-called friends who had been drinking my family's stolen champagne, saw the ship sinking and scrambled for the lifeboats. I watched as women who had been gossiping with my mother 10 minutes ago hurriedly deleted photos from their phones. They grabbed their coats and rushed for the side exits, desperate to avoid being interviewed by the police or associated with the scandal. Within minutes, the Vances were alone, abandoned by the very social circle they had destroyed themselves to impress. What about the food? Ms. Vance, the executive chef, asked, gesturing to the untouched towers of lobster and steak. Pack it up, I said immediately. All of it. Send it to the St. Jude's shelter and the downtown orphanage. Make sure it gets to people who actually appreciate a warm meal. I walked down the steps of the stage and approached the revolving doors. The police resumed their march, dragging my defeated family toward the exit. I did not shout. I did not gloat. I simply stood by the door, a silent sentinel of their destruction. My father looked at me as he passed, his eyes hollow. My mother refused to look up, staring at her shackled wrists. Tiffany, wrapped in her tablecloth, was sobbing softly. The security team pushed open the heavy glass doors. The blast of wind that entered was ferocious. The snow was falling thick and fast now, a white curtain blanketing the city. One by one, they were shoved out. My father stumbled onto the icy pavement. My mother slipped, but was caught by an officer. Tiffany huddled against the building, the tablecloth fluttering in the gale. I stood on the other side of the glass. Inside, the lobby was warm, smelling of lilies and expensive mahogany, bathed in a golden, inviting light. Outside, the world was dark, freezing, and unforgiving. I watched them shivering in the blizzard, stripped of their dignity, their money, and their pride. They were exactly where they had left me. But unlike them, I had earned my way back into the warmth. The blizzard outside had transformed from a flurry into a full-blown whiteout. The wind howled down the canyon of skyscrapers, whipping the snow into blinding sheets that stung exposed skin like needles. On the sidewalk, my family stood huddled together, a miserable cluster of shivering humanity. Because of the heavy gridlock caused by the storm, the police transport van had been delayed, leaving them stranded on the curb for nearly 20 minutes. They were defenseless against the elements. My staff had confiscated their fur coats and cashmere overcoats at the coat check, holding them as collateral for the unpaid venue fees. Now, My mother was shaking violently in her backless silk gown, her skin turning a mottled shade of blue and purple. Tiffany, wrapped only in the stolen linen tablecloth, was jumping up and down in a futile attempt to generate heat, her teeth chattering so loudly I could hear them through the glass. The facade of the perfect family had completely disintegrated. "This is your fault," Tiffany screamed over the wind, her voice shrill and broken. "You said you had the money. You said we were rich. You ruined my life." "Shut up, Tiffany," Cynthia shrieked back, mascara streaming down her frozen face. "Blame your father. He is the one who lied to us. He is the one who stole from his company." It was a chaotic symphony of blame and hatred. I pushed open the revolving door and stepped out. I did not step onto the exposed pavement. However, I stopped directly under the hotel's massive heated canopy. The industrial heat lamps above bathed me in a cone of warmth, creating a comfortable barrier against the winter night. I stood there, hands in the pockets of my pristine white suit, and watched them. My father, Robert, saw me first. He was hunched over, his face buried in his chest to protect himself from the wind. When he looked up and saw me standing in the warmth, his eyes filled with a desperation I had never seen before. He took a step toward me, but the handcuffs limited his balance, and he almost slipped on the ice. "Audrey," he stammered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Audrey, please. Dad is cold. It is freezing out here. Just let us stand in the lobby. Just for 5 minutes. Please. I am begging you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had watched me scrub floors for years while he bought new cars. I looked at the father who had laughed just 2 hours ago when I fell into the slush. A memory flashed in my mind. The sensation of the cold, wet snow soaking into my jeans, the sound of their laughter ringing in the crisp air, the sharp kick of my mother's shoe against my leg. They had not offered me a hand then. They had offered me ridicule. I took a half step forward, staying firmly under the heat lamp. "You laughed when I fell," I said, my voice calm and carrying over the wind. "You laughed when I was on the ground. Do you remember you told me I was ruining the aesthetic?" Robert sobbed, his nose running, his dignity gone. "Audrey, have mercy." "I am having mercy," I replied coldly. "I am letting you feel exactly what I felt for 20 years. You laughed when I was cold. Now, you can laugh while you wait for the police. Good luck with your new life in prison. I hear it is very cold there too." I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked back through the revolving door. The heavy glass spun shut behind me, sealing off the noise of the wind and their pathetic wailing. The silence of the lobby was instant and blissful. As I walked toward the elevators, I saw the flashing blue and red lights reflect against the snowy windows. The police van had finally arrived, a swarm of paparazzi, who had braved the storm for the scoop of the century, surrounded the vehicle, their flashbulbs exploding like lightning as they captured the Vances being loaded into the back of the paddy wagon. I did not look back. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the leather armchair of my penthouse office. The room was silent, warm, and smelled of lemon and bergamot. I held a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea in both hands, feeling the heat seep into my palms. Below me, the city of Chicago was a grid of glowing lights, beautiful and distant. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my contacts list. I scrolled down to the names I had been conditioned to fear and obey my entire life. Robert Vance, Cynthia Vance, Tiffany Vance. I pressed the delete button on each one. "Are you sure you want to delete this contact?" "Yes," I whispered to the empty room. I took a sip of tea and looked out at the falling snow. For the first time in 30 years, the silence was not lonely. It was peaceful. I was finally, truly free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on my family's karma. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.